on YouTube, and it is really for our own use and as part of building this collective. Thanks for the reminder. Just to say that the next webinar is also, it's a returning. So the whole idea of it is that we return to our research, or we might return to things we've already done before, maybe with other people, and we'd like to come to that again in a different way. The idea is that it's really informal, that it is very conversational, that it produces new ideas, things that you might not have thought about, but it's very much with other people, thinking with, and it's very much about questioning, cascade the questions, letting the questions do some work that is very unexpected, and also very much part of post-qualitative research. So I suppose, unless I've forgotten something, and please let me know, the next one is on the 22nd. Then Jane and Mirka are going to surprise us with disposable mask methodologies. It's also those, if you've got some ideas, these webinars are bringing people together that might never have presented together, and that they together then return to some of their own research. And in January, at the end of January, we've got a 3-day where we will be doing lots of different kind of activities. So one of the things that we do as part of these webinars, not with this one, but definitely with the 22nd one, is of this month, is that they are at the end of the month, and then we do reading groups on Monday from 4 to 5 South African time, where we will be reading some of the works that these people that are presenting together at the end of the month will be sharing with us. So we will be sending information. Well, there's actually one reading already that has been sent. So that's the one that we're going to start off next Monday at 4 o'clock. And I can't remember, Annika, how we were going to share that. Because we've got a WhatsApp group. So what might well be an idea if people who would like to be informed about that in the best possible way, in the quickest way, that they send you their telephone number for a WhatsApp, and then we add them to the WhatsApp group, and that's where the reading is going to be. Is that right, Annika?
Yes. We'll also be adding a form to the website where you can become a friend of the Post-Qualitative Research Collective, and that will give you access to these things. But in the meantime, it would be great if you could just pop me an email. I'll just put my email in the chat again for people who just joined, and just informing that you would like to join the reading group and be part of the future webinars.
So all the information, we're still working, well, the royal we, Annika is still working on finalizing the website, but towards the end of this month, all the information also about the webinars and all the readings, etc., will be on that site. But in the meantime, it will be through the WhatsApp. Okay, so I'm going to hand you over. I think you're going to introduce the speakers for today. Just for me, just to very much thank especially our presenters, and Roseanne, Anna, and Teresa. And I'm handing over now. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks and welcome, everyone. Again, thank you from wherever you're coming to us in the world today. In South Africa, it's actually our municipal elections, so provincial elections. So I'm going to be going off to vote later, but we've also got people, as Karen explained, waking up at 3 in the morning, and we know a lot of our colleagues from New Zealand and that part of the world, maybe other parts of the world, are not able to join us today, but that will be different in the future. I'm going to let Anne and Teresa and Anna introduce themselves when I hand over to them. But just to say, I'm performing a dual role today, which I'm going to be difficultating and facilitating this conversation, as well as participating. It is an experimental opportunity today, so just smile and nod encouragingly. Actually, that's quite an important thing. I think I may talk a little bit about the lack of kindness in academia, so I'm expecting some of that to be embodied and performed here today, but obviously, we're open to disagreement and disrupting notions as well. Not everything is a given. We're hoping to just see how this works. This is the beginning. It's the start of the series. If you have a question, you can put in the chat, but there is a particular format. I'm going to start off by asking a question that I'll answer, and then the other participants. And then we've got about 4 questions we're hoping to get through, but we may not get through them. They may get through us. And so we'll have to see how that works. And we're hoping at the end, possibly depending on how people feel, not that you need to be forced to do so, but maybe a way to think about how we will discuss or maybe meet somebody in this space is we will have a small opportunity for a breakout room, and you'll be able to talk about the new that has been produced. I work very strongly, deeply, passionately with communities of inquiry in philosophy with children, and so we're hoping today will be a community of inquiry. I do tend to speak quite fast. The brilliance is in the speed, no, not necessarily. Shame, but if I'm talking too fast, just please pop it in the chat. I'll try and look, or Annika can slow me down. But yeah, we're ready to do what we can in this short amount of time. But welcome everyone. We're really happy you are here with us this afternoon. Thank you. So as I've said, I'm Roseanne Reynolds. I'm a lecturer based at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. I have just submitted in August and received the results of my PhD. So it's very new, and will graduate with my PhD in December, which I'm obviously delighted about, but still reeling from all of that. Karen Morris was my supervisor. Thank you. Thank you to all of us, and colleague in the School of Education before moving to Finland. And as I said, the core of my work is philosophy for and with children. And if I could ask Annika to pop into the chat the first question that we all will be kind of working with, what we're looking at, and what I'm going to do now, what I'm doing now is introducing myself briefly and sharing an example from my PhD process, which expresses what worked in terms of supervision, my research, and for me as a PhD student. And myself and the other 3 participants will be engaging with this particular question. Very briefly, I work very closely with Karen Berard's work on, and specifically I'm using theories of temporal and spatial diffraction as a methodology. And what I've wanted to do in my research, or hope that I did do, was contested the borders and boundaries of the school as the research site. That's going to be my example, the one example I'm sharing with you today, in a suburb called Pinelands in Cape Town in South Africa. I chose to theorize the land of the research site as a constellation. I think some of you know or have read, or we all know about Karen Berard's work on what flashes up. And I'm saying we don't always have to look up at the sky as a constellation. We can look down at the earth as a constellation and also see it as the more than human, the inclusion of the more than human. I also situate my work quite firmly in the past that is not yet past, the apartheid past that is past, present, and future. And so I situate apartheid as gone, but not past in the school. I also think about the land as the skin of the earth. And in South Africa, you can imagine how land was divided up and carved and named for people of colors as they were designated by the apartheid government. So I write with and through the land. I contest what is known, what is given, diffracting through apartheid, through Pinelands, which is actually named as Pinelands, obviously by a man, but built as a garden city based on Welwyn Garden City in the United Kingdom, and talk about what can be taken as a given. I also think about research, and quite ironically, in research ethics, we need to give pseudonyms to the school's name and the children's name, but we don't give a pseudonym to the land. And why is that? And then finally, I diffract through who and what can be seen in the land through that multi-species encounter, and certainly think about the inclusion of the land as the more than human, as always political, and also as what else can matter in educational research, which normally doesn't matter. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to ask Pasley and to do a different or similar version of introducing himself and letting us know a little bit about his response to question 1. Thanks, And.
Kia ora. I'm coming here from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I did my PhD at the University of Auckland, and I was supervised by Louisa Allen and Maruk Teza. As far as supervisors go, they are pretty phenomenal. I've had a bit of a ball with them, and they've been, adequately punitive, disciplining. Yeah, I'm not sure if we're at post-qualitative supervision yet, or if we're still at discipline and punish. But yeah, so I was thinking about the things. Oh, I should probably premise that a little bit first. So I did my PhD looking at how trans secondary students matter in Aotearoa. And so I engaged with 4 transgender secondary school students, and we did cartographic interviews, and which were sort of divided by an art project. And so we sat down and we mapped what their education what their educational worlds looked like, and then they went off and did their art project. And that was an embodiment of their sense of gender. And then they came back and we remapped their educational worlds, thinking about how that embodiment of their sense of gender might navigate those cartographies. And so it was fantastic. I had a whole lot of fun doing it. And in the midst of sort of engaging with the relata, I sort of realized that the whole thesis was actually about time, and that the ways in which trans students mattered in Aotearoa was a temporal matter. And so I talked about trans students in terms of their space-time genderance, sort of playing on Karen Barad's space-time matterings. And so I think in terms of talking about something that worked with my PhD, I think the most interesting thing about it was all of the things that didn't. Really decentering my agency in the project, and sort of letting it sort of pull me in all of the directions that it would. So, and one particular participant I'm thinking about, he was, I mean, naturally, he was quite cautious about getting involved in research on trans young people. The history around trans research is not a pretty one. It tends to objectify trans people at the best of times. And the initial idea was to do focus groups, and they didn't want to sort of make themselves vulnerable to a whole bunch of strangers. But funnily enough, we never got to do the focus groups because I couldn't coordinate 4 students across 2 cities. And so there was this sort of almost last minute shift to the idea of doing one-on-one interviews, if there is such a thing, assuming that each of us are one. But they were sort of quite resistant even to that. And so instead of coming and sitting down and doing the mapping like everyone else, what ended up happening was we met in their neighborhood and went for a walk. And suddenly I was doing an impromptu walking methodology. And we walked and talked for 2.5 hours. They gave me the permission to record the conversation, and it became one of the maps. It just became quite differently. And at the end of our walk, they were completely keen to get involved in the research, and they ended up producing an amazing artwork and coming back and doing a completely different remapping than any of the other participants did. And so I just I think that one of the greatest lessons that came out of my PhD process was that idea of just letting go of that, the way in which we're disciplined to try and control the research process, and just to sort of give that away. That's sort of where I was thinking. Shall I save my question to afterwards?
No, you are totally on track. I was just going to apologize for not doing mine, but I'm appreciative that you have stayed focused. Please share your question and then I'll share mine.
So my question is, as recent PhD graduates, how do we foster opportunities as an academic community for ongoing opportunities to practice post-qualitative research? I'm looking at the job market, and the prospect of working in these spaces is quite challenging, and sort of going, well, how do I keep doing this? Because as an early career researcher, it's quite hard to get funded to go off and do your own project again.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Annika to capture, if you were able to capture Anne's question, please. And I will...
Sorry, Roseanne, I was just responding. I was just, that would be great. Thank you.
And you would just... So I didn't hear what you said, Annika. You just responding?
I was getting a direct message, so I wasn't focusing. Sorry, I missed the question.
And could you repeat your question, please, if you don't mind?
So how do we foster ongoing opportunities to practice post-qualitative research as early career researchers? How as a community do we foster those, postdoctoral opportunities in these spaces?
Thanks, Anne. And Teresa, just before you start, if you don't mind if I ask my question? Thanks, Teresa.
Of course.
So thank you. My question was, and I actually use it in my research to keep me, I won't expand. My question was, how can I be responsible to that which I love, which I have drawn directly from Barad, and I credit her with that. And she draws on Hathaway, making responsible. And for me, it was about, so Annika, that's my question. How can I be responsible to that which I love? And that was the title of the first chapter in my PhD. And just to say, Annika, you don't have to write this part down, but child not considered fully human, child not as deficit, child and childhood as reimagined. How am I responsible to that which I love, which is child as always already political? And how am I responsible to children? And theorizing about child is always already more than, and those entanglements is always already more than human. So thanks, Annika. Teresa, over to you. Thanks for your patience and your kindness.
Yes, thank you for calling me kind. Hi, my name is Teresa Aslanian. I am an American. I've living in Norway, and I've let's see, my position. I'm coming from the University of Southeastern Norway. Have submitted my thesis in 2019 with Jane Oskett here as my supervisor. Very happy to see you're here, and also Anna Greve from Norway. My subject matter was care, its presence and absence in practice and policy in early childhood education. And what worked for me with supervision in my study was the reaction I got from Jane when I talked about the kind of minor issues I experienced in my observations and in my practice that I hadn't actually believed that I could make the study about, but that I was actually found intriguing. And her reaction to it was, in my case, it was, I was looking at care, and I started talking to Jane about how, I was interested in how the things in the room were part of caring and how they cared. And she was like, yes, and then she just kind of jumped on it. And I began to see that as possible to follow up on my interests that didn't necessarily have a history in my research field, but that I could, still look at in a new way. So I think that Jane's approach coming from that field, coming from a post-qualitative mindset, was helpful to me, that what hasn't happened yet is possible to look at and work on. Yeah, I feel like we should. But I think that's what I wanted to say as an introduction. And my question was, how does post-qualitative inquiry affect our thematic research interests? Did I say that fast or slow enough, Annika?
Can you just repeat? Were you saying thematic?
How does working with post-qualitative inquiry affect our thematic research interests? Or how has it affected your thematic research interests?
Could you say a little bit about what you mean by thematic?
Well, thematic, I mean, for example, for And, it was transgender youth. For me, it was care. And for Roseanne, it was the way the land is a participant in. Yeah. So I think, even though we try to get away from themes, I think we do focus on certain areas where things converge in what we can call a theme.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Teresa. Thanks. Anna, over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. My name is Anna Moxnes, and I'm also from the University of Southeastern Norway as Teresa. I also submitted my thesis back in 2018, so it was really interesting to open up again now and try to go back to the processes I was in that period. And my research project was about reflection in higher education, in classroom teaching of pedagogic in early childhood education in Norway. And I think the story I want to tell from it is probably it's something about the process I was in at that stage, because when I applied for a research project, I got a project, and I started up on it, and I felt all the time that I was missing something in there. I was trying to do everything correct, trying to follow the institutional format or regulations or whatever they had for being a PhD student. And I was quite afraid of finding out where is my heart in this. I was just trying to do the right things. So I got a period in London at Middlesex University together with Jane, and I think one of the really highlights of my study was when I was supposed to go back home to Norway, and I finally dared to ask Jane if she could be one of my supervisors and to change into post-qualitative research as my research methodology in the project. And that was really, I was halfway through the process of writing my PhD at that stage. I collected all my research materials. And in a way, I was starting it all over again. But I think that was because I felt a little bit trapped, and it wasn't my university that made this trap for me. I was making it myself in the first part of my project, because I was just trying to do everything right and to put together articles to make the thesis was a really complex part of the journey in a way. And but also when I got that shift of thinking, it was really helpful for me, because I had to look at it in different ways, and I wanted my project to be deeply feminist. And it was really a struggle to find feminist perspectives within the theories I was dealing with, because reflection in Norway, it's all male, 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 and male can be feminist, but this was not feminist approaches in a way. And And what worked for me in supervision, I think the questions I got, the help I got to open up all Barad's concepts, Haraway's concepts, the discussions I had with Jane about what does this mean and how can I see this, and not only you, Jane, somehow I found a kind of research environment with other PhD students I knew who was dealing with the same theories, and they helped me also to open up what can this be, what can, and because I couldn't make I didn't manage to open up the concepts by myself, I needed to do that together with others to really to understand them more deeply in a way. But I'm so glad I did that change, because it was it gave me a lot of new challenges, but also tools, and I got my heart back in my research. So we should end this with a question, and my question is, what made you choose, or why did you choose post-qualitative research, and what was the deciding factor for you, or factors? Could be many.
Thank you, Anna. Let me not mute myself as I'm speaking. I mean, if we were in a room together, one of the problems, I suppose, or challenges about Zoom is not hearing the nodding and the giggling and the smiling or the sighing. So, feel free to unmute and sigh or nod or something. Nod with the dangling earring, I don't know. But just to make us feel like we're in the room and not all alone like we were in our PhD processes. We weren't all alone, but yeah, just to say, let's think about this. Karen, I'm going to suggest we keep those questions possibly for everyone at the end, and we carry on with question 3 and 4. Yeah, Karen, you can hear me. I'm going to suggest that we carry on. Okay. Thanks. So thanks everyone. I'm going to start again with our third question. I don't know if Annika wants to pop that into the chat. Our third question is just, how did the questions that were driving you or your research shift through the process of your research? And so you can think of this in your own research or the own ways you were working, and I'll start and then we'll go in the same round. So for me, it was about just really, really struggling with those research questions, because as much as you're doing something different, you're bound by those constraints. And then trying to listen for the concept in the question, which is something that I've been trained to do, but something I do in my communities, in communities of philosophical inquiry. Also, just also thinking about how these questions changed, and the returning to the questions over and over again. And then what was helpful for me was trying to think about how the question made each chapter an inquiry. I just found that would be helpful. And then maybe eventually not questions to be answered, but questions that became the Baradian / impossible to ask. So those are just that's my contribution to the questions. And I'm going to hand over to Anne. Thanks. You're still on mute, Anne, sorry, thanks.
So I was thinking about this, and like you become very immersed in the sort of final question that you're left with in the PhD research. The one that you end up answering in some sense. And so I was thinking about the central question being, how do trans secondary school students matter in Aotearoa New Zealand? And I'm just going, I sort of had that question sorted for a while. It's like, I was wrestling with that question. But I think that the difference was recognizing like which end of the question I was coming from. That it wasn't until I started engaging with the relator that I actually had any idea what that question meant. I was going through the interview recordings. There were like 29.5 hours of recordings through the first lockdown here in New Zealand. And so I had months where I'm just sitting and writing and recording, and sort of going, oh yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff here about time. That's interesting. I should probably write a chapter about time. And then starting to write the chapter about time and being like, no, there's far too much here for a chapter. What am I going to do with all of this? And sort of like getting really stuck in this, and until you sort of hit that point where you go, oh no, the whole thesis is about time. Like I can't answer this question in a way that isn't temporal. And that sort of, you know, I've been engaging with Barad. In fact, I even talked through this in my theory chapter, how I was engaging with the concept of apparatus for a long time, and interaction, and I got sort of all of the mechanisms, but they were all very static. And then there was this moment where I understood that my thesis was temporal, and all of a sudden, all of those mechanisms started moving, and it was like, you know, excuse the pun, clockwork, and all of the cogs start turning, and you're not sure what direction they're turning in. But I think there's just that point where your thesis starts sort of moving by itself and almost writing itself in ways. It starts producing boundaries and borders that you didn't realize that you had to cross, or that you suddenly realize that you can't cross. And it's like the thesis sort of forms around you as you're writing, and sort of acknowledging that process, like that process didn't happen for a long time. Like I took 5.5 years to complete my thesis, and I wrote 90% of it in the last 7 months. So like it's that, you know, you're turning, or you're returning on those ideas, and then there's just this moment where you're like, oh, I get my question now. And then it sort of takes on a life of its own, and it's sort of I returned to that this idea that my grandmother always used to tell me, that if you have a book in you, you won't be able to stop writing it, that the book will manifest itself in the way in which you live. And it just sort of happened and suddenly flourished, and I didn't really understand everything that was going on all the time, but it just took its own form, and that was, you know, lovely.
Great, thank you, and thanks. We have heart and we have love, lovely, coming back into this almost well, I won't classify or categorize what it is we're doing, but into a place that is quite difficult, and I'm talking about just academia and the PhD process. So thank you for that. Thanks. Teresa, I'm going to pass on to you about the questions that were driving you and how they changed.
Yeah, I think I'll just continue in the spirit of conversation with what you were talking about, And, because for me also, the questions changed in the beginning. When I created a research proposal in order to get my position, my questions were made in order to produce an answer, and they were really based on the field's needs, you know, the white papers that I knew were sort of relevant at the time. But then as the project progressed, and I read more, it was actually the combination of my personal interests and my heart's interests, the reason that I actually wanted to do a PhD, you know, my personal interest in care, and then the readings, you know, and in my case, it was Katherine Malabou and Barad and Foucault. And those readings and my personal interests created actual questions that I had, like what are those things doing in the room? What is care really, or what is happening? What is the doing of care? And new questions that I just didn't know that there was an answer to, but that I wanted to look at. And I think that's why I love working with post-qualitative theory and research, because it's a creative process, and it's, non-reductive, I guess. I find it more like an explorative quest in a way, but that's also has some limitations and some rigor, which I find also very satisfying, especially since I've been an artist, where I can also be an artist and make art, in which there really are, at least the way I make art, very little guidelines. So I really appreciate the combination of openness and explorativeness and thinking, and also some rigors. So my questions turned into more, rather than what should we know, I just started answering the questions that I just wanted to know the answer to, and that fit in.
Thanks, Teresa. Great, thank you. Anna, I'm handing over to you, and you can respond in whichever way makes sense.
It's really nice to sitting here listening to the three of you, because I think I feel that many of the things you're saying is comparable to what my feelings about this. I started off with a research question and ended up somewhere completely different from where I was able to think I should end when I started, if that makes sense. I think for a long period, I just have to forget my research question to see where what I was doing was taking me, in a way. And then in the end, going through, I was in a way fearing the ending process of it, because I thought, how will I be able to this together to make a question that, in a way, take care of all these different elements in the thesis. And also I did a thesis, what do you call it, PhD by publications, with 4 published articles. And then we had this meta text, a kind of, we call it kappe. And so the research question should, in a way, cover all these 4 different articles and the whole process, in a way. But I ended up with something that I really felt happy about. I like my final question, or the question, in a way. I think it's quite representable for the project. So I think what worked for me in that period was probably just to, in a way, forget about what should tie it together, do the work, and then tie it together.
Can I add a little bit at the end there, Roseanne? Because it's kind of interesting with this question, because I hear often that it's spoken of as a must, but I had a question for each article almost, but my whole thesis as a whole didn't have a question, and my opponent in my whatever, maybe what was the equivalent of a viva, I don't know, but the opponent who read my thesis, she had a question about that and wasn't very happy with it, but I still got it through. So I'm not sure if it's really is. I mean, it's important that we have questions, but I'm not sure if we need to think about it in the same way that we, that it has to be a kind of a sign on the door, nailed onto the front of the house kind of thing.
Yeah, the different work the questions are doing, and how that is perceived even sometimes as, what is this meant to do? Is it meant to show something and point us somewhere, or not at all, so that we can turn around and head in another direction, not in directions as if they're unilinear, but yeah, it's really interesting. And yeah, there's a lot of work. I also have done a lot of work on questions in school and how they how they work or don't work for children. We ask adults, teachers ask the questions, and children ask the questions, go, wait, but keep that later, we'll do that later. So similarly, how does that work in our research? We are bound by clock time. It's 16:47, and I'm going to suggest, and I'll ask Anne, Teresa, and Anna what you think. Should we just, I know we feel like we're just moving quickly through, but maybe move to our fourth question, and then we still have our questions we opened up for number 2, and maybe those we can, and I'll give this as an opportunity to the group to think about, would you be comfortable moving into a breakout rooms later, or just having a general discussion as a group? So those are 2 things. If maybe the 4 participants, if we could just in 1 minute each share what worked for us in our supervision when doing post-qualitative research. And then hopefully in the last just under 10 minutes, we'll decide either to go into breakout rooms or to work as a collective. So yeah, so I'll make the first, I'll just quickly, or I suppose briefly, share what worked in supervision. For me, some of you may or may not know, Karen Maris was my supervisor for my PhD, and I also had Viv help me start my process, which was very invaluable. And for me, what worked is I had lots of very big ideas about how I want to do this, but I struggled with the writing, and I'd first write my very big idea, my crazy idea, which was crazy, not as crazy as in mad, but crazy as in just encompassing all the stuff I've been wondering about and caring about for all this time, the injustices that we live with. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to go and vote later on today. I'll be in a queue with adults. If there are children in the queue, they will be in the queue with their caregivers. And when they get to the front, they will not be allowed to vote, and there will be no protest. So that's an example of the injustices we live with and the inconsistencies I have to live with all the time. So, and I write a chapter about that. I'm not just theorizing that children should vote. Why don't we give them not just moral, but political equality? Thank you to Toby Rolo's work. But yeah, so I'm just, for me it was, and then I needed to make a lot of the time, create, crocheted, I knitted through my PhD, my blankets are in my work, they're in the pages of my PhD. I built things and had to draw things because that was the way I was thinking through the frustration. So for me, that was really exciting. And the inclusion of those images and drawings. And Karen was, yes, Roseanne? I mean, there was a lot of the constraining and writing again and working over weekends and shaping it all. But that really worked, that I was able to go from like to anyway, and not that big or small was the alternate. It was just that shaping those ideas into something that could be given as a gift, I think, to, I suppose, to the children I was working with, to the school I was doing this research at. So that's, I hope that was a minute. Sorry if it was slightly longer. And over to you.
Yeah, well, I really resonate with that idea of it's less like the the traditional condensing of the reductionism of the question, but it's more like a how do you create a question that contributes the sort of phenomena that you want to the world. And I think it's really hard to figure out what that question is. I also think another interesting thing that I've observed with at least 3 of us is that we came into this space from like non-post-qualitative perspectives. When I entered my PhD, I had done research almost exclusively in quantitative spaces, and I taught computational statistics for a year, and it was a very I'm very much a big believer in the idea that the PhD is a process of letting go of all of the ideas that you're attached to, and then coming back to your question after reading and trying to put those ideas back together. I think one of the things with my supervisors was that while my thesis is very much Baradian, I spent the first couple of years really floundering in all of the theory that was, I was reading Barad and Deleuze, and I was reading all of these post-qualitative theorists, and I was reading Haraway, and not being able to figure out how to put it all together. Marek would, we'd sit down at a supervision meeting, and he'd say, like, I sort of see where you're going, but there's so much theoretical slippage here that I can't tell whether the onto epistemology that applies to this sentence applies to the next one. And so I think it was one of those things of like, it takes, just recognizing that it takes so long to figure out the politics and the relations, that to do the work of tracing the entanglements, the genealogies of the theory that you're working with, to really understand how they relate to each other, and still at the end of the thesis, it's a Baradian thesis, but I use Whitehead's propositions, and I'm still left with questions going, well, my thesis is about Baradian time. Is Baradian time compatible with Whiteheadian process ontology time? Like, how do we ask these questions in productive ways? And I still don't have answers. But I suppose that was the wonderful thing about Marek's patience with my process of sort of finding those channels where I could actually find theory that really worked for my work.
Thank you, and I'm going to hand over to Teresa, and then thanks.
Thank you. The first thing I mentioned already about being open to those kind of minor issues that we all have living inside of us. But another thing that I appreciated in my supervision was the kind of questioning of my assumptions that I thought I took for granted. For example, I was looking at the fact that the word care had been taken out of the framework for preschool teacher education. And that was kind of like my big, so I say, the catalyst of my whole project. And I was obviously underlying that was that I thought it should be there. But Jane one day was like, maybe it's good that it's not there. Why should care be regulated? It sort of escapes regulation that way. And I was like, oh, it was really nice, to get that other perspective, and then that kind of gave sort of became a catalyst for a whole another article that is really my favorite one that I made that wasn't connected with the PhD. So I feel like my best work, that not best actually, but for me, my favorite work was what was done that didn't fit in the PhD actually. That so that was the result of these kind of challenges though that I got along the way.
Thank you, Teresa. I want to talk about, we're talking about our PhDs, but we're not talking about the 2 million words that are not in it that we can't. Sorry, Anna, I've muted myself. I'm going to ask you to share, and I know we have 5 minutes, but just thanks.
I think for me it was of course the meetings. I was in Norway, Jane was in London, and I think Skype helped us quite a lot there. And also all the questions to what I was writing, the questions to my my ideas, and also always the question, could this concept work differently? Could it be something else? What else could it be here? One of my favorites is possibly, Jen, when you asked me, shouldn't it be another diffractive line here in this article? And I thought I was so happy about myself, because I thought I had developed really a good diffractive line into that particular article. And then you asked for one more, and I was like, what could that be? I don't know. And in a way, you left me there open with the question, and we decided a new meeting a month later or something like that, and I should continue working on that article. And I was thinking, and suddenly I came up with something, and I think questions like that I was given something to think about, and the feeling of being able to do things like that by getting these challenges in a way and then finding out your way through it. I think that was possibly one of my favorites, if I should pick a favorite. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Thank you. We have 3 minutes left. This is always the case. Or I mean, hopefully you're wishing for more and not wishing for 5 o'clock. But I just want to say thank you to everybody. I mean, maybe there's time for a question, but if there is a question from the audience, if somebody just wants to
nice.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry, I can't see everyone. But just to say, 2 weeks ago, I sent an email to the people who were part of the collective and asked them to suggest a PhD student. And these are the 3 students. Thank you to Marek and thank you to Jane for responding. And so we've had 2 weeks and we'd like to do this again if it can be better. Obviously, we want it to be better. It can be different. It doesn't have to be the same. So as Karen says, if there are other students out there, just a way to learn together and to learn differently. But certainly want to thank you all and for waking up at 3 in the morning, Teresa and Anna for responding to my many emails, and to all of you for being here today. So, and of course, thank you, Karen and Anneke for designing the flyer and for getting us all into this space. But yeah, if there's anyone who'd like to say one thing, we should probably join into song so we can all say something together, but no, we won't do that.
I really want to hear someone from out there, or else I feel like you're not there.
Yeah.
It's ready.
Teresa's demanding somebody speaks.
Please.
And actually, Teresa, can I just come in here? Because it makes it, because this is the first time, right? And it's very experimental. We weren't sure whether it was going to be an hour or hour and a half. And actually listening to it resonates with so many, and I've got so many questions as well. And I'm sure there are a lot of people in the room who would have loved to respond to you. So this is one question that is a very practical one. My suggestion would be that our next one is like 90 minutes rather than an hour, because I just want to thank you for also the style, the conversational style. And I've learned so much about ends of questions and impossible questions and about questions and the importance of questions. So maybe the people that are now in the room are going to be, talking to their research next time. Take that with you as well. But I suggest 90 minutes. And in particular, Roseanne, I would like to thank you for being in this double role, difficultating as well, and setting it up and getting it going. And of course, Annika and the people in the room who would like to be in touch and perhaps we're coming in later, please get in touch with Annika if you want to have immediate access to us and what we do. We do it through a WhatsApp group at the moment, but also our website. And Jane and Mirka Cora are going to lead the one on the 22nd. I don't know whether we've got maybe a burning point or question or before we finish.
Yeah, is there anyone who just wants to say one thing? Sure, we don't have to make you say anything.
Yeah, just one. Let's go one through. Everyone, just one word or a gesture, as long as it's not one of those.
Thanks, Hilary's giving us a thumbs up. Mari's also thumbs up. Sarah, thank you. Hi, Marianne, thank you. Thanks, Angela. Thank you, Nina. Thanks, Iveta.
Thank you. We haven't got Joanne, who could swivel on her chair, but maybe next time. She couldn't make today. Thanks, Candice. In the chat as well. Lovely from Marianne. Loch. Yeah, hope to see you next time. And thank you again, everyone, for speaking and for listening and for thinking and questioning together.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to everybody.
And Anna and Roseanne as well, Karen and Annika.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks.